Good morning. I'm Sara Baer-Sinnott, president of Oldways, and with my colleagues at Oldways, we are your hosts and organizers of Finding Common Ground. To start these 2 days, I wanted to tell you 3 things. What is Finding Common Ground, why it's important to Oldways, and who we are. Finding Common Ground brings together some of the leading nutritionists from around the world, asking them to listen to one another and come up with a common message so that consumers will know that it's not purple food or pizza that's going to help them lose weight or have lifelong good health. We also hope to make clear that it makes a difference, that each of us can make a difference individually, as a society, and the planet that we all share. And because it's essential that all of these messages leave this room, go beyond this room, we've invited some of the best communicators to talk about the problems of communicating when sometimes the information isn't new or hot or sexy, and to come up with some solutions for it. And as to why it's important, our organization's goal is to make an impact on the way Americans eat, an impact that changes public health. And I know that our scientific co-chairs, David Katz and Walter Willett, feel as passionately about that as we do at Oldways. And so our goals for these 2 days are 3: to craft a unified, clear message about eating well, to examine the ways that nutrition messages get distorted and why, and talk about solutions, and also to unite scientists and journalists in a positive campaign for better public health. And why Oldways? This is our 25th anniversary, and we're celebrating it with you here. And I want to tell you a little bit about Oldways. It was founded by Dunn Gifford, who was a politician, a lawyer, a developer, a restaurant owner, a lover of good food and wine and people. And Dunn was also a visionary. When he returned from culinary travel in Italy and China in the late 80s, he was concerned about what he called techno-food, sort of fake food, highly processed food, that he saw threatening to eradicate some of the wonderful culinary and cultural traditions around the world. And so he came back to Boston and founded Oldways. And the vision of Oldways then is the same that it is now, that there is value in preserving cultural and culinary food traditions for future generations, and that heritage foods and traditional diets not only are delicious, but they're healthy and nutritionally sound, and that these diets are sustainable. From his days working with Bobby and Teddy Kennedy, Dunn also believed that each one of us can make a difference. To remind himself every day, he put a picture of Bobby behind the door in his office. And the picture is still there. And because it's now my office, I look at Bobby every day. And I think we're all here because we do believe that we can make a difference in improving public health. So that's how it started. And we've, in 25 years, established a track record in the health and nutrition space by emphasizing cultural diversity, bridging the gap between nutrition and food because we eat food, and helping people make connections. We've focused on cultural diversity since day one, recognizing and being intrigued by the incredible health benefits of the way of eating around the Mediterranean. In 1993, we organized the first Mediterranean Diet Conference in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just across the river, working with Walter Willett and Demetrios Trikopoulos at the Harvard School of Public Health, Antonia Trikopoulou from the University of Athens, Elizabeth Helsing at the World Health Organization, and Marion Nessel at NYU. We set out to describe the characteristics of the Mediterranean diet. But we were really concerned about having these characteristics leap off the page so that people would understand them. And the USDA had just introduced their first pyramid, and so we took their idea, and the Mediterranean Diet Pyramid was born. But we also recognized that there were although there are very similarities between cultural models for healthy eating around the world, you just have to think of rice and beans, and they're around the world. But there are differences in recognizing these differences, and that one size doesn't fit all. We introduced cultural models for healthy eating in pyramids celebrating the diets of Asia, Latin America, vegetarian and vegan, and most recently, African heritage. But pyramids are just the start. We've also put together resources that bring these pyramids to life. One of my favorites is a new program. It's a Taste of African Heritage. It's a 6-lesson curriculum teaching cooking and nutrition of the diet of African heritage, which is based on the culinary traditions of the African diaspora. We've started more than 100 cooking classes in communities around the country, learning the cooking and nutrition of the African heritage pyramid. And the results are quite astonishing. They've shown improvements in weight, blood pressure, and weight. In 6 weeks, 63% of participants lost weight, an average of 4 pounds. And they lost a ½ an inch around their waist, and a third of them reduced their blood pressure stage once. And they also changed their behavior. They started cooking more and eating more vegetables. 66% report that they are cooking vegetables 5 times a week. And even also very important that heritage has been a motivator for change. As we say on the front of this brochure, that diabetes is not part of your heritage, neither is heart disease. What is in your heritage is a healthy heart, a strong body, extraordinary energy, vibrant and delicious foods, and a long, healthy life. And you have the power to claim all of that using heritage as your guide. Many of our efforts to bridge the gap have to do with bringing nutrition scientists together for consensus like we're doing here. We've brought the Healthy Heritage Pyramids are one example, as are consensus statements for dietary fat, healthy pasta meals, and glycemic response. Oldways founded the Whole Grains Council, introducing the Whole Grain Stamp, which helped consumers find whole grains. We learned that consumers couldn't find them in stores, and despite years of dietary advice, the needle really hadn't moved. But this has really made a difference. In a recent survey this summer of more than 1,000 consumers, 2 out of 3 people make at least half their grains whole. Making connections. We achieve this by making connections, creating relationships with food and places that inspire the value of quality food and motivate cooking, which in turn improves public health and well-being. This was the case when we founded the Chefs Collaborative in 1993. This is an organization of chefs that promote local sustainable foods and make connections between farms and restaurants and farms and families. And while it may sound very much current today, 21 years ago it was a hard sell, and they're doing great work. We're also at it in different ways. African heritage, a taste of African heritage is one way. We're introducing a taste of Latin American heritage for those of Latin heritage in the next couple of months. Culinary travel. We have programs for supermarket dietitians. And the Oldways Cheese Coalition promotes artisan, traditional, and raw milk cheeses and the cheese making, while also championing best practices of food safety and the cultural links of the cheese to the places and people that make it. This conference, Finding Common Ground, had its beginnings in conversations I had with Simon Poole, who you'll hear from tomorrow. He's a family physician and a little bit of an activist in the UK. And we talked about the Mediterranean diet. But I felt that there were bigger issues, and rather than focusing on the individual trees, that the overall vision of the forest was more important. And we know that there's been a lot of misrepresentations and misinterpretations of scientific results, which create consumer confusion, catchy headlines because they're controversial, but they miss the overall vision of the forest. So I went to see Walter Willett in his office in January, and we talked about this misrepresentation of scientific studies and crazy headlines and consumer confusion. And I asked him, could we bring together scientists with different views to come to a common sense message? And he said, absolutely yes. And we both said David Katz was the perfect scientific co-chair. And David said, you know, this is really up my alley, so I'm in, and the event was born. We are very, very lucky to have the two of them. Walter, probably the most quoted and published nutrition scientist anywhere, and David, such an amazing speaker and writer on true health. So I thank you very much for being such important parts of this event. I also felt it was important that we do this event, find common ground without any kind of corporate sponsorship. And I'm very grateful to the Oldways Board of Directors for agreeing that this is an important thing for us to do and a great way to celebrate our 25th anniversary. I'm really sorry that Dunn isn't here to be a part of it. He would have, those of you who know him, he would have loved this. This is just perfect for him. But I thank you all for coming and being a part of it, especially to this dream team of nutrition scientists and speakers. It's an amazing collection, and thank you so much for being here. And for you communicators, I hope that you take this common ground once it's found, and a truly unified, clear message that you use. And I hope you look to us at Oldways and to the scientists after this conference. We really want to help and be a part of your communications. And we'll be talking about a few other programs to continue finding common ground. So the setup for today, we're going to be hearing from scientists, mostly in pairs of two, talking about different eating patterns. And following each of these pairs, Walter or David and a journalist will make commentary and ask questions. And then after lunch, we'll hear about some special issues, special factors, sustainability in the environment, gluten, saturated fat, food marketing, and the food environment. And following those presentations, David or Walter and a journalist will also make commentary and ask questions. And then at the end of today, consolidating information from what we've heard in panel led by David and Walter, we'll come to some agreements or some sort of consolidation of information about plant foods and animal foods. We'll find common ground tomorrow and talk about how best to communicate it and to get around the problems that exist there about communications. So without further ado, I thank you for being here, and thank you too very much. And we wouldn't be here without you. And I give the floor now to Walter Willett and David Katz.
Well, thank you, Sarah. This really is the vision of Sarah that brought us together here today. And I'm glad I could be a little part of the support for making that possible. As Sarah said, this is a really tremendous, special group of people here today, and everyone is invited with the understanding that I think everyone in this room is doing what they do and participating specifically in this conference, trying to overall improve human health and well-being. That's the broadest goal, I think, that brings us together. Obviously, we do it in different ways, and the vision was that we, by talking to each other and understanding and looking for the common ground, we could do this most effectively. That doesn't mean that we're trying to agree on every single thing. Life would be pretty dull, actually, if that were the case. And we learn from our disagreements, I think, over time. That I don't learn when I agree with someone. I don't learn much at all, usually. So I think, again, this will be an interesting process to see where we define the common ground, which I suspect will be larger than a lot of people would think it might be. This is a timely moment to have such a conference. When I started work with the work that I'm doing now, this was in the late 1970s, and I had been interested in nutrition for quite a while and started to look more deeply. There were recommendations and admonitions at that time about avoiding eggs entirely, or very quickly thereafter avoiding all types of fat in the diet as much as possible. And when I started to dig down, there was really very little evidence on which to base this. And I realized that nutrition and nutrition recommendations at that time was to a large extent who could speak the loudest and who had the most authority. It was almost like religious wars in the Middle Ages. And that if we were going to avoid that, obviously not desirable, we really needed more evidence, because the evidence base on which to make dietary advice was indeed very limited at that time. That led us to set up several large cohort studies beginning in 1980 to look at diet and health outcomes. And many other people have now begun ways of studying diet. There are many different approaches, but the traditional nutritional means of short-term animal studies or sort of looking at metabolic pathways and test tubes clearly is so remote from what we food that we put in our mouth, and the connection between traditional biochemical nutrition, while it's informed a lot of what we do, that connection with human health is very, very distant. We needed more direct information. But it's interesting that the authorities had in nutrition were people who had won Nobel Prizes by their work on identifying a cofactor or an enzymatic reaction or something like that. So they became the leaders and the voices. But in fact, they really knew nothing much about health or food even. So I think we've come a long way since that time. We don't have perfect information. I think we'll never have perfect information. The ideal trial is to randomize several million people at birth, or perhaps randomize their mothers or their grandmothers to a number of different diets and follow them throughout their life. Of course, never going to be possible to do that. So we're always looking at a piece of the picture, and no piece gives you 100% of what you'd like to look at or know. So we have lots of data. There's no single kind of study that can produce perfect evidence. Randomized trials are sometimes held up as perfect evidence, but they can be null for many reasons. Our biggest and most expensive randomized trial was the Women's Health Initiative, and that was meant to reduce fat. In the end, there were no changes in HDL cholesterol or triglyceride at any time during the trial, indicating there was really very little difference in fat intake over this 9 years of the study, despite many hundreds of thousands of dollars that went, many hundreds of millions of dollars that went into that study. So we have lots of evidence. How we put that together, utilize it, use all the available information to come out with the best understanding of our diet and health is really the goal here. Different people have done different kinds of studies, look at data somewhat differently, but still there's a lot to base our discussion on that we didn't have even 10 or 20 years ago. So again, welcome for everybody. Especially appreciate those who came long distances to join us, and I look very much forward to the next 2 days. Thank you.
So my thanks, oh, that's good. My thanks to Sara, whom I absolutely love, and the Oldways team for assigning us this critical mission of attempting to see past the fractious and disassembled bits to a larger common truth. And we may begin by noting we are not the first to confront this particular challenge. It was 6 men of Indistan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me 'tis mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a snake. The fourth reached out an eager hand and felt about the knee. What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain, quoth he. 'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree. The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, E'en the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can. This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a rope. And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. So oft in theologic wars the disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about the elephant not one of them has seen. And I'm with Walter on the fact that we have somehow managed to devolve into religious wars over topics in nutrition. And so, my friends, we convene here having much the same problem in nutritional epidemiology. But we can't bog down. And so, again, my thanks to Oldways, which is the perfect convener for this, Sara and the team. The stakes are simply too high. We know what's in play. We heard about it first in the modern era from McGinnis and Figi with this paper 22 years ago. And this really is all about what kills us. And we traditionally refer to leading causes of premature death as heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia. But 22 years ago, we all got the memo that differences in lifestyle and environmental exposures were the root causes of those chronic diseases, which in turn take years from our lives and life from our years. Diseases aren't causes. Diseases are effects. And what McGinnis and Figi told us those 22 years ago is that 80% of the premature deaths in our country each year were attributable to just 3 bad habits. Bad use of our feet, our forks, and our fingers. Tobacco, poor diet, lack of physical activity. That memo was reaffirmed 10 years later when Ali Mokdad and others reanalyzed this issue. And then we heard from Earl Ford that you could flip this proposition around. If people didn't smoke, ate well, were physically active, and had a healthy weight, their probability of any major chronic disease, heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia, etc., was 80% less over the period of observation than people who got all 4 of those wrong. And flipping the switch on any one of these from bad to good was associated with a decline in the risk of any major chronic disease by 50%. But all 4 cylinders, 80% reduction in the risk of chronic disease. And one of the noteworthy things about the Ford study is the simplistic marker they used for a healthy diet. Habitual intake of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains was good. Its converse, not so much. No debate about different fatty acids, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, gluten, genetic modification. Just habitual intake of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains went a long way toward answering the question. And if you happen not to like Potsdam for any reason or prefer fresher data, reaffirmations of this basic proposition in the UK a few years back by Kavavic, in the US by McCullough et al. And then frankly, this is just a repetitive drumbeat in the peer-reviewed literature showing us again and again and again that as uncertain as we are about every last detail of diet and lifestyle, what we know is enough to consistently reduce the risk of all major chronic disease and premature death by about 80%. And if the data aren't enough to convince us, we have the real-world ethnography. And in fact, when I think about fundamental insights regarding healthy diet, healthy living that are too big to refute, 2 entities come to mind. One is Oldways, which is helping us find health not through hyperbole, not through headlines, and not even through hypothesis, but as they say, through heritage. What actually works in real worlds, spanning cultures across the expanse of generations. And the other is the Blue Zones, the beautiful work of Dan Buettner, who began life bumming around as a long-distance biker, and as a fellow for National Geographic stumbled into the world's longest-lived populations and has since gone on to do a brilliant job of describing for us all what they do. And what they do is both diverse and quite concordant. They all eat well, diets of real foods, mostly plants. They're physically active. They don't smoke. They sleep enough. They're not stressed out. Strong social connections. feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love. So a beautiful real-world ethnographic affirmation of what the data have been telling us. And so all of this really indicates that here we are in 2015, still wrestling with a massive and growing burden of chronic disease, and the greatest potential to change that has been in our hands all along, with better use of our feet, our forks, and our fingers. And the problem, of course, is knowledge isn't power if you don't put it to use. We've made some progress with regard to fingers, a lot less smoking. We're reasonably clear about what to do with our feet. But when it comes to forks, we are bogged down in competing opinions, and the public is confused. And this rises all the way up to a level where we can actually sabotage the recommendations of our own Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. Houston, we have a problem, and so we come to a fork in the road, and frankly, we've taken it to very dubious places. We've taken it here, and we've taken it here, and I think we could do a heck of a lot better. I've been thinking a lot lately as I wrestle in my own work with this challenge of consensus and how it might lead to an advancement in the human condition unlike any we've seen recently. I've been thinking about lunar missions, and my naive understanding of how we put footprints in a flag on the moon devolves to three basic considerations. We want it to go. We are a relentless, resourceful, and pertinacious species, so if we want something bad enough, we get it. And there was no bickering and arguing about where to find the damn thing. That was crucial, right? It's not as if there were competing theories about which is the real moon, and you really need to go this way, not that way, and everybody agreed where to find it. And so we got there. I frankly think the luminous contribution of lifestyle to the human condition should be less hard to achieve, given what we know, than putting footprints in a flag on the moon. But it absolutely does require as a prerequisite that there be some fundamental agreement about where to find the damn thing, which is why we're here today and why we all need to be here today. And ideally, over the course of the next 2 days, be able to acknowledge that despite disagreements in all sorts of areas of details important to each of us, that there is fundamental agreement, that there is common ground beneath our feet. And so the idea here is that in this cyberspatial age of constant din and discord, fractious bickering, no one voice, not even Walter's, and I agree with Sara, to the best of my knowledge, Walter is enviably well published and I mean, you know, you're publishing away and you think, yeah, I got 100 publications, I got 200 publications. You look at Walter's publication record, you say, oh, shit. 10 to 1. I mean, it's just embarrassing. But, you know, in any event, even Walter, you know, it can't be heard above the din. But what if we pool our voices? And so there is a doctor we were unable to invite to this conference, Dr. Seuss, who unfortunately at this point is permanently indisposed, but we might take a page from his playbook. In Horton Hears a Who, Dr. Seuss recognized that no matter how important the message, no one person's voice may be adequate to deliver it. But if all the Who's banded together, maybe they could just change their fate. And of course, indeed they did. I trust you all know the story. The Who's said, we are here. Our message is different, that there is fundamental agreement. If we can assert that, potentially it can be heard above the din. Potentially there is a strength in our unity of purpose. Potentially by mapping out common ground, we can rally to common cause. And we can make all the difference in the world, or maybe even a difference that's out of this world altogether. It's a great privilege to be involved in the conference. Sara, Walter, thank you very much.